going to do here today is we're going to install the Sweet Manufacturing removable steering wheel and hub to a stock General Motors column. We're working on a 2000 Pontiac Firebird. That makes no difference. Okay, the first step to doing this obviously is remove the old steering wheel and the airbag, and that's what we're about to do. The screws are on the back side here that remove the airbag. To remove the airbag, this connector comes straight out. You have to pull this safety plug out, and then now the airbag's removed. And we don't use the airbag. Sell it on eBay, make a few bucks if you want. This is the puller setup. I've just used long bolts. As you can see, they're threaded into the two holes that I described earlier. And just take an impact and there you go, and it pops right off. So there's the wheel off, and you'll have to remove some clips and wires down here. These are all horn wires. They really mean nothing. So you should just slide off here. Oh, you got these wires too, and another connector. And I'm not saving any of this, so it doesn't really matter. But I disconnected, and there the steering wheel's off. This is the clock spring, and to get the clock spring off, there's a C-clip right down in here. Use C-clip pliers to get those to get that off. And sometimes they're tough. There we go. Partially off. There's the C-clip off, and the clock spring should come right out here. Just a little coaxing. There we go. Excuse me. And this is connected down, all the way down over here to the airbag harness. All airbag stuff is typically yellow in color. So we're not going to use any of this unless you want to sell it on eBay. You can try to remove it, but I'm just going to cut it because I really don't choose to keep it. Something to note too is all the wires that run up and down this go in the sleeve, and they're tucked in here, and to get these wires out you'll have to push this in this manner to get them to go up through the column. I don't recommend cutting these because you can use these. This is the wire for the turn signal and the wiper motor, and later I can show you how to run a delayed wipers and stuff using the factory wiper switch. So I don't cut this, I save this. These other wires are for the ignition switch and stuff, and you can get rid of that if you're not going to use the ignition switch on the column to build this. The next step is this tool here compresses this part right here. Mm-hmm. It compresses this to remove, there's just a little bitty snap ring. It's not a C type, or it doesn't have the holes. It's just simply a ring. So you compress this, and you got to fish that out with a small screwdriver. And I'll show you. You set this tool up like this. This threads into the GM column, and use the wing nut to actually start to compress this. And as you can see with this compressed, clip in there, honey. That seat, that little clip is exposed. And you basically just have to dig it out with a small screwdriver in there. And remove said clip. Which, don't destroy it because we're going to need it later. And you can cut because this might take me a while to get this thing dug out. Okay. I've got the clip off, and now you slowly remove the compression tool. And like I said earlier, you want to definitely save the clip. Now the column has no tension on it, and this will be important later. You have to save this clip. As you can see, it's just a round C-clip. And you have to save this lock ring. As you can see, this clip will nest down in that thing as well, so it kind of is a safety measure that it doesn't come loose. But we save that piece along with the nut. This is for the horn. That's not needed. This spring is a must save, so you got to save that spring because that provides the tension on the whole column shaft. As you can see, the column shaft is very loose here. All right, next step is we're starting to remove just the functional pieces of the turn signal. This screw here, things will start coming loose. Luckily for our purposes, since we're just making a race car column, we don't need that. This connects the turn signal to the latching assembly. You're going to need a T20 Torx screw to get the turn signal assembly out. There'll be three, it's pretty obvious. These T20 Torx screws, you don't need any of these for later. Again, we're just simplifying this column. And here the turn, oh, forgot one thing also. If you can't get this out, there's a Phillips screw right in the center of this hazard switch here that has to come loose. Sometimes it's tough to get out, but that it goes into the side of the turn signal assembly. There you go. And now the turn signal assembly will come out. And again, it's attached down the column to all the wires. If you're going to save this turn signal assembly, you're going to need to fish it out. If you're not going to use this turn signal assembly, you can just cut the wires and pull them through the other end. The next screw to come out is this one right here. This portion here just pull it out with needle nose pliers. This screw here will allow you to remove the ignition switch. The ignition switch is a T20. Excuse me, it's not really the ignition switch. This is actually referred to as the tumbler assembly. It's just a pin, and then this thing will pull right out. And this little wire here is connected to the orange wire that runs all the way down the column, and it is basically for the VATS, which is the vehicle anti-theft. And you can kind of fish that wire all the way up, or you can cut it unless you need the VATS for some strange reason. But see, that'll feed right on up. This will pull out, and you can feed the whole assembly out. And there's the ignition key assembly. We're going to remove this plastic cover, which is actually has a pretty important role because it kind of retains the bearing and stuff. But it's these 3 T, what they are is a T30 Torx screws. And we're going to remove those. You can stop while I do this. The 3, I should say, T30 screws. And now this whole assembly starts to come out. And there's the screws. We'll get to the meat and potatoes of it. This is the turn signal assembly, and you unscrew this is the tilt wheel mechanism. That just threads in. You're going to need that, but that allows you to get this off. And here is these wires, and this is the time. It's kind of difficult. I like to save this portion with the turn signal mechanism here. This because I like to use this for a remote or a wiper on and off switch, because it will give you the park function and all the delay functions of a wiper motor, and I can show you that in another video. Remove this little plastic clip and turn this connector on its side, and you have to feed it all the way up through here. Now I won't struggle with it on this video. We'll cut and we'll pull it apart, but that's how you get this out. The next step is we're going to get rid of this pin, which this pin interfaces with the locking mechanism, and that forms your anti-theft lock. Well, by rule for CMC, you can't have that in there. So this is real easy. This is just a 1/4 inch nut there. This literally, you get a screwdriver, and then this just kind of slides out. This black gear just pops off, and then this whole thing just comes out, and you can chuck all this. It doesn't matter, because it ties into this pin is on the other side of the ignition switch. You don't need any of that. This rod here is the high beam. This is what activates the high beams, and we don't need high beams on here, so I'm going to remove that with 2 screws here. This rod is incredibly difficult to get out. I usually just cut it to get it out of the way with just a little zippy wheel or something like that. All right, this piece we don't use, but it's very important, because this spring goes into there. This goes like this, and then we have our retaining clip like I explained earlier. What you need to do is replace this metal, this thickness here, with a washer. You don't need all this outer ring, but you do need a washer that's going to have this inner diameter right here and this thickness or close to it. Because what happens is this plate, this assembly, goes on here, and then onto the column. This spring and assembly, and then when the clip goes in, provides the preload on this bearing. If this whole assembly is not tight, pushing down hard on this, your column's going to wobble around, and it won't work. So the key is the thickness of this piece here, and I just get a washer from the hardware store that's about this thick, or maybe even thicker. You can compress it down a little bit more and grind out the inner diameter to fit. The outer diameter of the washer really doesn't matter. It can be as big as this thing, it doesn't matter, but typically it'll be maybe 1.5 inches. Now we have our clip, our retaining plate, and this washer replaces the plastic piece I had earlier. And the reason we do this is when I go to weld this splined shaft onto the column, the plastic washer would melt. So that's why. So what I've done is I've opened this hole up to 0.745 inches. And so now this forms as basically a spacer behind the spring onto the shaft. So now what will happen is we have our spring, we have our new washer, which I've used a die grinder to get on there. And I've got it really tight. It just went on a second ago. It will go down past that. There we go, like that. Then the retaining plate goes on, and then the clip, and then what we do is put the shaft on, and then we will weld around the shaft, and I'll show you that in here in just a few minutes. But before then, if you have a loose column that starts out loose before you even get going to it, what happens here is these pivot pins right here and right here, this is what the tilt column pivots on, will wear out. So what I'm going to do is pull those out right now and see what the problem is. Pins out, I made myself out of just a piece of flat stock, a simple little tool to pull, a little puller to pull these pins out. These pins aren't pressed in there that hard at all, but I just have it's threaded on the center of the pin, and I have a screw that goes into that. Just a simple weld a few nuts on there, and this, as you can see, will easily start to pull out the pins. As you can see, it's coming out very easily. You might even be able to just hook a vice grips to a screw and pull them out, especially if they're loose. 2 pins out of the sides, and we'll see what the problem is. But as you notice, it's under spring tension. There's a spring right here that goes into this pocket here, and that's what provides the tilt functioning. So it pivots right up here. So I'm going to take the column head off by driving this pin out. Okay, the reason why this column is loose is this is the column head that goes on there, and I'll explain how it pivots in a few minutes. But this pin is the pivot pin, and as you can see, this would be the driver's side of the column. You can see this pin is very loose in there. It wiggles around because this hole has been, this is a cast aluminum. It's been hogged out from use and pulling on it, versus the other side, which you can see this pin goes in and fits quite nicely and tight. So what needs to be done is the pin, you either got to enlarge the size of the pin, which you can do, or you can buy these pins that are already larger in diameter, or have someone machine you some pins that are larger. The corresponding hole right here where the pin goes into, this is also worn, and this pin wiggles around in that as well. So what I do is I'll take my MIG welder, and I'll weld a little material on there and then regrind it down, and then press the pin in to tighten them up. It doesn't function very smoothly as a tilt function, but it tightens it up, and for what we're doing with a race car, you just really want it tight. You don't necessarily worry about the tilt function as much. So that's what I'm going to do. So the way the column also works is that pin we drove out, these little hook mechanisms hook against these pins right here, like this action here, and that's what gives you the detents for tilt mechanism. This spring provides the tension this cup rides on this ball right here, and this goes into this pocket here. So when you're reassembling this, it's kind of a tricky. You might have an extra friend come by and help you, but you got to push the spring in there on that ball like that with these clips in there, and then drive the pin through. It can be kind of tricky. Probably the most difficult part of repairing this portion of the column. If you don't have a loose column, you don't need to worry about any of this. You can just weld the hub on there and be done. This column was loose, so that's why we got to go a little bit deeper. The pin here, and I've ground it down, or actually added metal to it, then kind of ground it down into a rough shape. It's not really critical, but that works. Additionally, I have got basically the column head, if you will, done. The clips are in here. These are the retainers. There's teeth on the back side, and here is the this is for the tilt function. Basically, the pin goes behind here. This pin right here will go behind there, and it clips in, and it's all ready to go with the spring. This is kind of a messy job with the spring here. It's kind of a messy job because of the grease and stuff, but I'm going to install that now. Okay, it's kind of difficult by myself now here to show this in action, but these clips clip underneath, these clips right here clip underneath the pin, and I've compressed or pulled up on the column, clicked it in, and then I'll push down here at the bottom, compress that spring while simultaneously pushing in this pin, and you'll see it will pivot on top of on the top here off of this. So may seem a little bit more difficult than it actually is, but that's how you clip this in, push down here, and put in this pin at the same time. Thanks. Okay, I've put the washer, the spring, the cup. There's a cup that puts tension on the bearing, the spring, the washer, and the retainer, and the clip will go on. But before I put these on, this cover assembly, it doesn't have to be there. I just put it on just because it looks a little better. So anyway, I put those back on. So now I'll put the retainer and the C-clip on there. Okay, I put the compressor tool, the retainer, and I put the C-clip in there. Don't forget to put that in there. And then the compression tool. I'll compress that down and snap the C-clip in there. Okay, what I've done here now is I've assembled the locking plate with the pin with the C-clip, and this is the nut that was originally obviously a hex nut that I basically round down in the bench grinder, and this will thread on here. And the sole purpose of this is to basically form as an alignment for the splined shaft that's going to go on here. And then what I'll then will do is I am going to weld down here in the corner. I'll weld all the way around this and weld this to the main shaft, and then the procedure is complete.